Good morning and welcome to the daily chapter reading of The Gift of Anger by Aaron Gandhi. Lesson 9, The 5 Pillars of Nonviolence. Most of us think of important people as being serious and imposing, but my image of my grandfather is of a kind, funny man who liked to relax and played games. At night at the ashram, he liked to go out walking for a couple of miles, and I often got to accompany him. My grandfather was only about 5 feet 5 inches tall, and by the time I was 14, I was much taller than he. He would drape my arm around my shoulder and the other arm around a young man who joined us. He called us his walking sticks. He would swing his legs off the ground when we least expected it, and swing from our shoulders with the same delight as a little kid being swung by his parents and yelling, "Wee!" If we slumped in surprise as he played his game, he would laugh and say, "You're not paying attention." Bapuji's robust sense of humor made him a down-to-earth man, and he used his natural wit to convince people that he wasn't very different from them. As he got older, people focused only on his noble qualities and assumed he had been saintly from birth. But he never claimed he had been born with any special talents, and he reminded me often that he came from humble beginnings. He achieved his greatness only through determination and commitment. He was convinced that we can all change ourselves for the better if we want to. Bapuji used fasting to make political statements, but when he was younger and hadn't yet started to simplify his life, he used food for a different purpose. He loved to eat, and one of his favorite foods was an Indian sweet bread called Puran Poli. One day in South Africa, he and my grandmother, whom we called Ba, invited some guests over for lunch. Ba was cooking in the kitchen when Bapuji wandered in, enticed by the good smells. He was delighted to see her making his favorite bread, but told her worriedly, "We won't have enough for all the guests." "This will be plenty," she said calmly. "But I could eat all of this myself," Bapuji insisted. "No, you couldn't," my grandmother replied, shaking her head. "Are you challenging me?" he asked with a twinkle in his eye. "Go ahead, make what you have, and let's see who's ripe." My grandmother cooked up 18 pieces of Puran Poli, each the size of a large pancake. She served them to my grandfather, who ate one after another and polished them off happily. Ba had to admit defeat. Over the years, Bapuji gave up his beloved Puran Poli. Maybe the 18 pieces were enough for a lifetime, and many other foods as his lifestyle became simpler and simpler, such as prisoners. By the time I was with him at the ashram, his food was absolutely bland with no salt or spices. Once I asked my relative Abha, who cooked his meals, to let me taste what she made for him. "You won't like it," she warned me. "It's absolutely tasteless." The concoction was a mush of vegetables cooked in goat's milk. I took a spoonful, but I could barely choke it down. The next time I saw Bapuji, I asked him why he made himself eat such uninspiring meals. "I eat to live, not live to eat," he said with a smile. I said that Bapuji wasn't perfect, and maybe he went a little too far with his simplicity, but he was making the point that if we learn to live simply, we can help others simply live. Bapuji believed in the power of personal transformation. Sometimes this requires great effort, and sometimes we just need the right nudge. He believed that small actions can snowball into much bigger ones. As usual, he didn't lecture me about that. He let me learn it myself from his examples and the stories he told. One night at the spinning wheel, as we sat comfortably together, he told me the story of a hopelessly disorganized young man who lived alone in a small apartment. The man never cleaned or did any household chores, and dirt covered everything. His kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, Bapuji said. Not just overflowing, but piled right to the ceiling. The man knew his place was a pigsty, but he figured that if he didn't invite anyone over, then nobody would know. At work one day, he met a woman and started to fall in love with her. He took her on never to his apartment. They strolled in the park and talked by the river, and one day she plucked a beautiful red rose and gave it to him. It was a gift of love, and even this man who allowed himself to live in a squalor knew that it had to be preserved with dignity. He brought the rose home, and after rummaging through his dirty dishes, found a vase. He scrubbed it, filled it with fresh water, and put in the rose. Now he needed a place to display the vase, so he cleaned off the dining room table. The vase looked pretty there, but he thought it would look even better if the rest of the room were as nice, so he put things away and polished the floor. Then he washed the dishes. The chain reaction of cleaning continued until his whole house was tidy and fresh. He wanted everything around him to be as beautiful as that rose. Poor woman's one small act of love in giving him a rose turned out to be life-changing. Even as an awkward teenager, I was moved by that love story. All of us have our imperfections, but a simple gesture of tenderness can make us feel accepted and help us transform into a better version of ourselves. Sitting at that spinning wheel, I told myself fervently that as soon as somebody loved me, I would make sure I was worthy of her love and keep my he's clean too. Babaji agreed that love can have great power, but he wasn't just a romantic. He had an additional reason for telling that story. He wanted me and all of us to be roses in the world. We can each provide the bit of brightness and hope that we can make people want to be better. One vivid example of love or hope or truth can make everything else seem dingy in contrast. Once that contrast is set, people around us have a clearer view of their own possibilities. They can be part of the dinginess or join in adding more roses to the vase. When you are good, you make everyone around you aspire to be better than you are. One more point about the story. Our sloppy bachelor cleaned up his act without anyone having to criticize him. He didn't have to be told that what he was doing was wrong. He already knew it. He just needed an example and an inspiration to make him happier doing dishes than leaving them in the sink. If the woman who gave him the rose had instead complained to him about his bad habits, he may never have changed. We respond better to positive incentives than negative ones. Telling a colleague, a friend, or a family member that he or she has failed and doesn't measure up will only backfire. People turn defensive and rebellious when attacked, but finding something to praise and admire will promote the behaviors you like and hope to encourage. The example set by Babaji's generous nature and kindly manner probably did as much to bring about change in India as everything he said or revoked. A positive spirit is one of the most powerful gifts we can give ourselves or others. Psychologists are now finding that when we express positive emotions like love, gratitude, and generosity, we dramatically increase our own sense of well-being and can even have positive effects on our health, including lowering blood pressure, decreasing stress, and sleeping better. Babaji's non-violent approach gave people a constructive and optimistic way to move forward in situations that might otherwise have seemed hopeless. People often think of my grandfather as uncompromising in his principles and willing to stand alone in his fight for justice. But some of the most insightful historians have pointed out that he was a negotiator first. One of his great skills was his empathy and understanding of his opponent's position. Babaji started out trying to negotiate with the British government, being respectful and calm when he did. But eventually he realized that negotiations wouldn't work, and he required a different approach. The Peaceful Salt March was just one example of his moving to the next level. People in India who wanted to be free and independent were bursting with anger, and there were many violent and explosive incidents that took place all over the country. My grandfather gave them a positive way to voice their discontent and to strive for change that would make things better. Nonviolence encourages the good and hopeful in people rather than the bitter and angry. My grandfather's calm demeanor and easy smiles remind people that looking for peaceful opportunities is always better than getting mired in despair. Some years after the Salt March, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Bill, which was a first step in bringing self-rule to 300 million Indians. Many considered it a great victory for my grandfather, but he wanted to be sure that his fundamental message of love and non-violence was heard. His goal wasn't simply to replace one government with another. The Satyagraha movement went beyond politics. A journalist at the time who opposed my grandfather's positions described a meeting he had ended with some of the Indians who would take over from the British officials. He found them as arrogant and cold as the people they would be replacing. But he described Babaji's expression as one of extraordinary innocence and benignity, with two soft beams streaming out of his eyes. Though he disagreed with his positions, the journalist found himself spellbound, weeks dissolved. The soft beams of light that streamed from Babaji's eyes were a reflection of the genuine love and kind goodness and the positive spirit he brought to everything he did. Remember that the word satyagraha that he used to describe his nonviolence movement translates as soul force. You get strength from the positive and the loving spirit you bring to your actions. He never saw his movement in strictly utilitarian terms. He wanted to convince the British to change their position, but he also wanted to bring a greater understanding and a positive light to the world. Babaji saw that governments and religions often rule by fear. Religion controls people by threatening them with an angry God who will condemn them to hell if they misbehave. Those within a religious circle may also be judgmental and cast out people who don't accept their views and demands. Governments can use more direct controls like fines and imprisonment. Even parents and teachers, as we have seen, often rule by fear and threats of punishment. Babaji believed we need to move the world through love, not fear. He showed love and kindness and optimism, and people flocked to be around him. My grandfather wanted people to understand the nuances of nonviolence well beyond avoiding physical aggression. He lived by the 5 pillars of nonviolence, and he wanted me to try to follow them too. So I have tried to live my life with those 5 important foundations: acceptance, appreciation, compassion. I sometimes hear people say that Babaji had a utopian vision that can't exist in the real world, but I think quite the opposite is true. The principles he set out are absolutely basic to civilization, and we ignore them at our peril. Respect, understanding, acceptance, appreciation, compassion. Respect and understanding of other people, whatever their religion, race, caste, or country, is the only way the world can go forward. Putting up walls and divisions always backfires in the end, leading to anger, rebellion, and violence. In contrast, when we respect and understand each other, we naturally evolve to that 3rd pillar, acceptance. The ability to accept other people and positions allows us to grow stronger and wiser. The other 2 pillars of nonviolence, appreciation and compassion, help bring about personal happiness and fulfillment, as well as greater harmony in the world. Appreciation has a very deep resonance and can make a profound difference in each of our lives. The happiest people aren't those with the most money, but those who can appreciate the beauty and kind goodness around them. It's easy to find reasons to complain and criticize and point out what is wrong. We can give ourselves much more joy by choosing instead to look for things to appreciate every day. Babaji was masterful at appreciating the world around him. He looked for the good in everybody. Sometimes when I visit India, I meet children and families who have so much less than most Americans, yet they seem to appreciate what they do have so much more. I wonder if we dull our own abilities for appreciation by drowning ourselves in too much stuff. It's as if we spend our lives at an all-you-can-eat buffet and so cannot see the pleasure in eating one shiny apple. Most of us aren't going to adopt the dramatic simplicity that Babaji chose for his life, but we can use it as a model and a reminder that less is sometimes more. Less stuff and fewer distractions may lead to more appreciation and gratitude, and so more genuine happiness. If finding reasons to be grateful doesn't come naturally, you can learn how in a few simple steps. Pause for a few minutes in the course of a day to appreciate a beautiful sunrise, a budding flower, or the sound of a child's laughter. Look at your life from the outside and think of all the people around the world who would be happy to be in your position. Make a list of the things you appreciate about your own family and friends. You can duck it into a drawer to look on those days when you need a reminder that gratitude comes from the inside, not the outside. We do violence to ourselves when we focus on what we are missing or lacking rather than appreciating the gifts we have been given. You don't have to follow a particular religion or even any religion at all to appreciate the marvels and the mysteries of the world. They are there for all of us. By bringing more appreciation into your life, you can change your attitude and your perspective on the world. Too often we compare ourselves only to those who have more than us. But appreciating what we have leads to compassion for those who need our help. Compassion is much more than writing a check to a local charity, though that certainly helps. When you act from compassion, you stop to find out another person's strengths and hopes and figure out what you need to do to help him or her be independent. When you allow yourself to respond to others with compassion, you recognize their need for self-respect and to treat everyone equally. Once you understand others and incorporate them into your life, Babaji's pillars of nonviolence will seem absolutely essential to the well-being and the peace of each of us and the world as a whole. Imagine the happiness we could all feel and spread to others if we lived by those 5 pillars: respect, understanding, acceptance, appreciation, and compassion. Babaji found ways to spread his message in even the most unlikely circumstances. Some years before I got to the ashram, my grandfather was attending one of the conferences in London to discuss the future of India. As always, he decided to wear the homespun cotton he had adopted as his uniform. He was representing the Indian people, most of whom lived in utter poverty, and the garments were a reminder of that. The British officials treated him with respect and arranged for him to be in an elegant spot in London with security befitting a head of state, but Babaji declined. I'd like to live in the midst of the textile workers, preferably as their guest, he informed them. The British officials were aghast. Remember that Babaji's position on keeping Indian cotton in India had hurt the British textile industry. With India spinning their own cloth, British companies weren't able to charge the big markups that they had previously, and British workers were angry at my grandfather for their lowered wages. If you stay with the textile workers, they will kill you, one of the officials warned. There is so much anger among them that we fear for your safety. That is all the more reason that I should be with them, so that I can explain the case of the Indian people, Babaji said calmly. Reluctantly, the British acceded to Babaji's request, and he went to meet the textile workers. He approached them with the respect and understanding that they were his hallmarks. He described to them the extreme power that was going in India and explained how spinning their own cloth allowed the people in some villages to rise above the most meager level of subsistence.